Larry Rousseau is an Executive Vice President of the Canadian Labour Congress. They've given us some generous support for this event. Larry was just elected this springtime, so he's been in office for a few months. Before that, he had a long career with the Union of National Employees, which is part of our Public Service Alliance of Canada. And so he's had a long career in the labor movement. This event is really built on all the partners coming together. So tomorrow you're going to see a really impressive panel of employers with different experience and perspectives on disability and work. So tonight we're going to hear a few remarks from Larry Rousseau. So thank you, Larry, for coming.
Thank you, Alec, for your kind introduction, and thank you to the organizers of this national conference on disability and work in Canada. I'm very happy that there's a ramp here. I actually prefer ramps because my spouse prefers ramps. Terry is afflicted with multiple sclerosis, so finds stairs very difficult. So we are always much appreciative whenever there's a ramp, and there still are not enough in society. It's a constant struggle, isn't it? We have to fight, and we continually have to fight in order to get our space and our rightful positions in society. And I think that when you live with someone who has a disability, that's when you really start to understand the challenges and the difficulties that are faced each and every day. So the Canadian Labour Congress, of course, is the largest labour organization in Canada. We represent 3.3 million unionized workers from coast to coast to coast. And as such, we've always been a very strong advocate for Canadians living with disabilities, as well as injured workers. It's good to see you, Richard Hudon. It's been a little while, but life has a funny way of making us meet again. And I'm very, very much impressed that you're still here and that you're still with us and that you're in the forefront of the fight for injured workers in Canada. I really commend you. It was great seeing you this evening. I think that when we look at the struggles that we have to go through, labor has always taken a holistic and systemic approach to advocacy and actions for workers with disabilities, including workers facing mental health challenges and injured workers. Indeed, in the federal public service, we are so happy now that we actually are adapting a national standard for psychological health and well-being in the workplace. It's a struggle, I must admit. You've got the employer side, you've got the labor side, and very often we find that on the labor side we're having to really educate the employer side on so many aspects of recognizing that mental health in the workplace is extremely, extremely important. So our goals, we need to ensure representation and inclusion of Canadians with disabilities and injured workers in the labor force. And from my personal experience, I can tell you that some of the most difficult cases that I've had to deal with is with managers and employers who just don't see it, just don't get it. For too many employers, workers with disabilities, it's almost as if they're being done a favor to have them in the workplace. We're not looking at the real contributions that workers with disabilities bring into the workplace, and very often too many managers are simply trying to find a spot to say, we've checked this box, we've achieved this in our plan, and then we forget. They are forgotten, they're pushed aside, and when push comes to shove, especially when we have cuts like we've had in the past many years under the previous government, it was really a shame. And it was a real shame to see that workers with disabilities were often at the front of the line in being shown the door. And it's a constant struggle to have to remind people, no, this is not the way that we should be managing in the workplace. But as a labor activist, I can say that when we do get victories, The victories are had because workers come together, and in solidarity, when we have strength in numbers, we can also make sure that our voices are heard. So we've always been a strong champion for strong health and safety legislation. That is one of the biggest roles that labor plays in the labor force. It is to lobby consistently for strong labor legislation that ensures better protection and improves the safety, the health and safety of workers in the workplaces. So we'll always be advocating for and looking for better return to work provisions and supports for injured workers. Prevention. You know, we say that prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Why is it that we're spending so much, and we spend so much time talking about prevention, but yet in the workplace, each and every day, we are constantly reminded, the examples are there. We don't have enough health and safety activists to make the inspections. We don't have enough on the work side, especially on the employer side, to say, yes, we need to spend money to make our workplaces safe. Especially in the private sector, it is an absolute shame. Again, today, we have a worker who has been injured on a construction site. On a construction site that we constantly have to remind the mayor, the councillors, and the powers that be that this has been a shame from the time that it was started that we have had so many workers who have been injured on the workplace. So prevention and return to work provisions will reduce greatly the rate of injury and make for safer workplaces. We also believe that Canada needs a more robust and proactive legislative framework for Canadians with disabilities, and it is very important to be working with people such as yourselves, people who are working day in and day out. Your organizations are doing great work on this front, but we are painfully aware that over the past many years, many of your organizations have not had the funding that is required to do the kind of work that is necessary. It's all wonderful to sort of cut government programs and say the NGOs are going to take up the slack, but it's very difficult to take up the slack when there's no money to be able to do the work. And then to be able to actually say that we have good people, professionals who are doing work that used to be done by the government, but now you're taking up that slack, and yet you constantly have to do fundraisers or look for funding to get to be funded. This also has to stop. So yes, I mean, you know, I'm just telling it as it is, my friend. So we are committed to pressing this government and governments from coast to coast to enact strong and aspirational legislation on accessibility based on a human rights framework with a social justice approach. I have always been a fervent social activist. I've militated for peace. I've marched in this city and other cities for social justice, for LGBT rights, and certainly we need to do so for workers and Canadians who have disabilities, and that is a continuing struggle for which I thank you again for the work that you do. So we have done consultations at the CLC. We've been out there with surveys. We constantly want to know what's going on in this field, and it's not surprising that employment is always the top issue whenever we have consultations with workers who have disabilities. You know, life is not over when we have a disability or when we have been injured in the workplace, and that is the message that we have to get out there. You know, we need to make sure that our politicians are well aware that when persons are dealing with disabilities day in and day out, the workplace should be the first place that they are welcome and they are accommodated and they are put to productive use to continue to make this country a great country. So, today, persons with disabilities continue to be unrepresented and systemically excluded from the labor market. And so we strongly urge governments, federal and provincial, to strengthen and robustly implement the Federal Employment Equity Act, especially the federally regulated employers and the federal contractors program. So, if we look at the new government workforce development agreements that consolidate the existing Canada Job Fund agreements, the labor market agreements for persons with disabilities, and the targeted initiative for older workers, we must ensure access, flexibility, and meet the training needs of workers with disabilities. The challenge is not just exclusion from job opportunities, however. It is also the lack of accommodations and supports which allows people to work with less difficulty and to their full potential. There are many gaps and system failings in the disability benefit system, in part due to the tied relation of benefits to employment, such as employment insurance, CPP disability, and the disability tax credit. We need better and improved social protections that will also enhance the engagement and tenure of Canadians with disabilities in the labor market. For labor, it's not good enough to build a future that benefits only a select few. So we remain strong in our commitment and support for labor rights and human rights of Canadians with disabilities and injured workers. We are committed to collaborating and working together. And I mean that because now that I have the responsibility for this file, I hope that I will see you more often and that I'll be able to work with you. Please, we have Elizabeth Kwan, our research officer here from the Canadian Labour Congress. She's attending this conference, so please feel free to seek her out and to ask for advice and find out how we can work together. It's never over, this struggle. It never will be over. I'm not making myself any idealistic promises here. There will always be a struggle with persons with disabilities in this country because there are far too many people who believe that you should be excluded from the workplace and not included. When we see people who want profits and put profits above people, we have a lot of work to do, folks, and we have to make sure that people understand just how important this work is. I won't take any more time. I know I've gone beyond that, so please have a great conference, and again, thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.